Rome, in its golden age, appeared to the world as eternal, unshakable, destined to rule forever. Marble temples rose against the sky, aqueducts stretched across valleys, and the roar of the Colosseum echoed with both triumph and cruelty. To many, it was the very definition of civilization and power. But beneath the polished surface of monuments and decrees, another Rome existed, quieter, hidden, and often ignored. Among the countless voices silenced by history, one belonged to Marcus, a man without rank, without a family name carved into stone, yet with eyes that saw what others preferred to forget. He was not a senator, nor a general, nor a poet commissioned by emperors. He was something humbler, but in many ways more enduring, a scribe, a copier of documents, an observer stationed at the fragile edges of empire. Day after day, Marcus sat with ink-stained fingers, copying speeches, edicts, and accounts that praised Rome's greatness. Yet in the margins where no one was meant to look, he wrote his own notes. Small fragments of doubt, moments of truth, glimpses of suffering that official history tried to erase. He was neither revolutionary nor rebel. He was a witness. For Marcus understood something simple yet profound. Empires rise not only through victories, but also through silence. The silence of those whose pain is forgotten, whose names are lost, whose lives are reduced to statistics in the triumphal language of rulers. By preserving even the smallest details, Marcus defied that silence. He gave the future a chance to see Rome not as it wished to be remembered, but as it truly was. Magnificent and brutal, eternal yet impermanent. It is through this unassuming figure, tucked away in shadows, that we begin our story. Marcus's life unfolded not in palaces or battlefields, but in dimly lit chambers where parchment crackled and the smell of ink hung heavy in the air. By trade, he was a copyist, a man tasked with transcribing the voices of others. Edicts from emperors, speeches from senators, records of taxes and tributes, all passed through his hands. His work was mechanical, repetitive, almost invisible. Yet it was within this monotony that he found his quiet freedom. As he copied, he observed. He noticed not only the words, but also the gaps, the omissions, the deliberate distortions meant to flatter the powerful. To most, these documents were sacred, unchallenged truths of the empire. But Marcus saw the fingerprints of politics everywhere. A famine left unmentioned. A military defeat softened into strategic withdrawal. A tax doubled yet described as a gift to the people. Rome's official voice was carefully polished, but Marcus could read the cracks beneath its surface. In the margins, where he assumed no one would ever bother to look, he began leaving traces of his own. A single line, a quiet correction, sometimes no more than a symbol reminding himself of what the text concealed. Not victory, but slaughter. Not generosity, but burden. He did not write to change his present. He lacked the power, the status, the army for that. He wrote because he believed that one day someone might see through Rome's mask. His colleagues often mocked him for his slowness, unaware that behind each careful stroke of the pen lay an act of quiet rebellion. Marcus knew the dangers of what he was doing. In an empire that controlled its image with relentless precision, even a whisper of contradiction could invite punishment. Yet he persisted. He told himself that truth, however fragile, must not be allowed to vanish entirely. To the empire, he was a nameless scribe. To history, he was becoming something far greater, a hidden witness, writing for an audience that did not yet exist. As Marcus grew older, the empire itself seemed to age with him. He watched emperors rise and fall, each promising renewal, each leaving behind new scars. The Senate, once the proud heart of Roman authority, had become little more than a theater of submission. Senators bowed their heads, not out of loyalty, but out of fear that dissent would lead to exile, or worse. Marcus copied decrees that ordered entire villages razed for suspected rebellion. He transcribed records of tax levies so crushing that farmers abandoned their fields, swelling the slums of Rome with desperate mouths to feed. Each document he touched was a silent testament to suffering, a chronicle of injustice disguised as governance. Yet, what disturbed him most was the silence of the people. The citizens, lulled by entertainment and the promise of grain, rarely questioned the cost of their comfort. The empire fed them illusions, and in return, they offered compliance. To Marcus, it was not only chains and whips that enslaved a people, but also ignorance, carefully nurtured by those in power. Still, he could not completely despise Rome. For every cruelty he recorded, he also saw fragments of resilience. A mother who shared her last crust of bread with her starving child. A freedman who risked everything to buy his wife's release from bondage. Soldiers who, despite orders to plunder, chose mercy when no one was watching. These small acts reminded Marcus that humanity persisted, even under the shadow of tyranny. In the solitude of his study, by the flicker of a single oil lamp, Marcus often wondered if his quiet observations mattered. Would his hidden notes ever be found? Would future generations see not just Rome's marble and glory, but also its cracks and bloodstains? He did not know, but he wrote anyway, because silence, he believed, was the empire's most dangerous weapon, and writing was his only form of defiance. Time was relentless, and with it came the slow unraveling of certainty. Marcus had once believed Rome invincible, its legions eternal, its power unshakable. But in his later years, he began to witness the fractures widening. The treasury groaned under endless wars. Provinces that once bowed in submission now stirred with rebellion. Even the legions, once disciplined and loyal, grew restless as emperors bought their allegiance with gold rather than honor. Inside the archives, Marcus felt the tremors of decline. Requests for new scrolls multiplied, not to record victories, but to justify losses. Reports of barbarian incursions grew frequent, each one glossed over with exaggerated triumphs to mask the sting of defeat. He copied proclamations that spoke of Rome's eternal glory, while his ink traced the empire's slow descent into fragility. What unsettled him most, however, was the corruption of memory itself. Libraries ordered to purge inconvenient texts, philosophical treatises branded as subversive, histories rewritten to flatter those in power. Marcus saw how truth was not only suppressed, but reshaped, twisted into narratives that suited the ruler's ambitions. And in this manipulation, he recognized the true fragility of Rome, not its armies, but its honesty. Yet, even as he copied these distortions, Marcus continued his quiet rebellion. He preserved fragments others would have destroyed, hiding them among mundane documents where censors would not look. A phrase here, a passage there. Threads of truth smuggled into the fabric of lies. He knew it was dangerous, but he also knew that civilizations do not collapse merely from external attack. They collapse when they lose the courage to face themselves. In his heart, Marcus sensed that future generations would not inherit Rome's perfection, but its contradictions. And he hoped, perhaps vainly, that one day someone would read between the lines and see not only what Rome wanted to project, but what it truly was: brilliant yet brutal, mighty yet fragile, eternal in appearance but fleeting in essence. In the final years of his life, Marcus moved more slowly, his hands trembling as he dipped his stylus into ink. The archives, once a place of awe, now felt like a mausoleum, each scroll a tombstone of forgotten truths. He no longer feared Rome's punishments. What he feared most was oblivion, that the empire would bury not only bodies, but memory itself. Sitting beneath shelves heavy with records, he often reflected on his quiet defiance. He had not raised a sword, nor led a rebellion. His resistance had been made of ink and parchment, whispers hidden among official decrees. Perhaps it was insignificant. Perhaps it would all be destroyed when his fragile body turned to dust. Yet, he consoled himself with the thought that truth had a strange endurance. Even if hidden, even if burned, fragments always survived, waiting for those willing to search. He remembered the faces he had seen throughout his life, the peasants whose hunger was erased from reports, the slaves whose names never reached the ledgers, the soldiers who bled so emperors could boast of glory. Their lives had been reduced to numbers, their voices silenced by rhetoric. But Marcus carried them in his memory, and through his secret writings, he gave them a chance, small, fragile, but real, to be remembered. One evening, as the sun sank behind the Tiber and the city glowed in twilight, Marcus closed his last scroll. He felt no triumph, only a weary peace. He had done what he could, and that was enough. The empire might endure for centuries, or it might crumble within decades. Such matters were beyond his reach. But truth, he believed, belonged not to emperors or armies. It belonged to time, to those who came after. And so Marcus left his quiet legacy, not marble monuments, nor victories carved in stone, but words scattered like seeds, hidden among the empire's vast records. Words that told of Rome not only as it wished to be seen, but as it truly was: glorious and cruel, magnificent and flawed, eternal in name yet fragile in reality. Whether those seeds would ever grow, he did not know. But he trusted that someday someone would find them, and in doing so see Rome not as legend, but as truth. Generations passed, and Marcus's name faded from memory, just as he had expected. Rome endured, then fractured, then fell to invaders who cared little for its scrolls and monuments. Fire consumed libraries, marble crumbled, and the empire that once called itself eternal lay in ruins. And yet, in the quiet corners of forgotten archives, fragments of Marcus's work survived. Scholars centuries later stumbled upon scattered passages that did not match official histories. They found notes in margins, subtle corrections, accounts of events that contradicted the triumphant proclamations of emperors. At first, they dismissed them as errors, the mistakes of some scribe. But as more fragments emerged, a different picture of Rome began to take shape, one far less polished, far more human. Through these scraps, Marcus's whisper carried across the centuries. He had written of famine alongside feasts, of the enslaved alongside the conquerors, of doubts alongside triumphs. His work reminded future generations that history was not merely what rulers dictated, but what ordinary eyes had seen and ordinary hands had endured. For historians who came after, these fragments were treasures more precious than gold. They revealed the contradictions of Rome not as flaws to be hidden, but as truths to be understood. And though Marcus had died believing his rebellion was small, his persistence became a seed that grew into a different way of thinking about history, not as propaganda, but as a mirror, however fractured, of human reality. In this way, Marcus achieved what he never dared to dream. He outlived Rome, not in marble, not in power, but in words. His legacy was not the empire's illusion of eternity, but the endurance of truth itself, fragile, hidden, yet stronger than fire, stronger than time. By the time the Middle Ages unfolded, much of Rome's grandeur had turned to rubble, its roads overgrown, its aqueducts crumbling. Yet in the dim scriptoria of monasteries, where monks labored to preserve what fragments of the ancient world they could, Marcus's hidden voice survived. Most monks did not know his name. To them, the odd passages they copied were curiosities, deviations from the official accounts of Livy, Tacitus, or Suetonius. But they preserved them nonetheless, for their task was not to judge, but to save. And so, through candlelight and patient ink strokes, Marcus's quiet defiance traveled across centuries, cloaked in anonymity. When the Renaissance dawned, curiosity about Rome surged anew. Scholars hungry for authenticity scoured libraries and archives, seeking to separate myth from fact. It was then that Marcus's scattered words began to take on new weight. In Florence, in Venice, in the universities of Paris, whispers of the unknown scribe circulated among intellectuals. His fragments contradicted imperial decrees, exposing Rome's triumphs as fragile masks over deeper fractures. Some dismissed these texts as dangerous, corruptions meant to tarnish Rome's legacy. Others, however, embraced them as vital corrections, glimpses into the true heartbeat of a civilization long gone. In debates across Europe, Marcus's hidden legacy became both a puzzle and a spark, a reminder that history was not a single voice, but a chorus, often discordant, sometimes silenced, but always present. Thus, Marcus, nameless, forgotten, erased, was unknowingly resurrected by the very scholars who sought truth. His words, scattered like seeds through centuries of dust and ink, now blossomed into questions that challenged the certainty of empires and the arrogance of rulers. For in every era, power sought to write history, but in every era, fragments like his reminded humanity that truth could never be fully buried. In the modern age, with its libraries, universities, and archives digitized for the world to see, Marcus's fragments finally stepped out of obscurity. Scholars began piecing together the scattered notes found in monasteries, private collections, and forgotten corners of European libraries. Individually, they seemed minor, brief corrections, quiet observations, seemingly insignificant contrasts to Rome's grand narrative. But when assembled side by side, a startling pattern emerged. Historians realized they were hearing not the voice of a senator or a general, but of someone much rarer, an observer who worked in the margins of empire, neither celebrated nor cursed, but simply present. Marcus was not recording Rome to glorify it. He was recording it to remember what it truly was, both magnificent and flawed, powerful yet fragile, triumphant yet cruel. Modern scholarship embraced this discovery. His writings offered a counterbalance to the polished accounts of emperors and official chroniclers. For every speech of conquest, Marcus preserved whispers of hunger. For every monument, he noted the cost in lives and labor. For every promise of eternity, he traced the shadow of impermanence. What made his words extraordinary was not their grandeur, but their humility. They spoke not from the throne, but from the workshop, the marketplace, the crowded tenements. In them, historians found the humanity of Rome, stripped of illusion. Marcus became a symbol of resistance, not through rebellion of arms, but through the rebellion of memory. Today, students read his fragments in classrooms. Scholars debate their authenticity and interpretation. and writers find inspiration in his quiet courage. Though his name remains uncertain, his legacy stands. Proof that truth, however fragile, can outlast the empire that seeks to silence it. Marcus, the forgotten scribe, lives on not because of what he destroyed, but because of what he preserved. The simple, enduring fact that history belongs not only to the powerful, but also to those who dared to write honestly in the shadows.